Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome to the Southborough Library. This is our first event in our author series for 2016. We're having another author event in March and then another one in May. So there's flyers all around the library and you can check your website. This is my favorite out of the bunch though, because Kathleen has sort of come in and been a regular library user for a while now. So she wrote a really great book. I'm really glad that all of you came to support Kathleen, and I'm going to let her talk more about her book, what's it all about. So, thanks.
Let's see, who don't I know? Thanks, everybody, for coming. I really appreciate it. I think you know that I'm Kathleen Laplante, and I'm the author of Unraveling My Father's Suicide. There are a few things that I want to say just before I get started, so that you know. There is a Facebook page for the book, and you just have to put the title of the book into the search bar within Facebook or on Google or whatever, and you will be able to view it and see what's happening. It's not just about the book, it's about work that's being done to eradicate suicide in general. These are things for the taking. There's business cards, there's pens and little goodies that I forgot about Lent. Oh well. Where did Ryan go? I wanted to thank Ryan because he's the one that invited me to come here, and he's been a really big help in helping me to get set up and go. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is how I came to write my book. And then I'm going to talk about suicide from two different perspectives. And that will sort of flow into readings from my book. And after that, we'll have a question and answer session and a book signing. So how did I come to write my book? So let me say, first of all, I never anticipated ever writing a book in my life. So the fact that this got done is sort of a mini miracle to me, you know. So I belonged to writers groups, and there were always people in there trying to write a novel, trying to get agents to submit their books to, and all that kind of stuff. But that was always something that they were going to do, and other people were going to do. And I was going to write my newspaper articles, my engineering reports, and my blog entries, you know, and I was going to do that forever. But it didn't turn out that way. So let me tell you, like, between the time I wrote the book and the time that my dad took his life, it's been 30 years. So it's been quite a span of time. And in that time frame, there's been a lot on my plate, personally, that I've had to deal with. Moving several times, job relocation, a divorce, you know, and actually like converting back to Catholicism. That was pretty serious and taking a lot of energy and time as well. So in between all of those, every now and then, the issue of my father's suicide would pop up. And in therapy, I would talk about, you know, what it means, why it happened. It happened on my birthday. How does the rest of my family feel about it all of that kind of stuff. But it would be in little pockets over time. And then a few years ago, it came up again, and I decided to look on the website for the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention. And I was looking through there, and it has a call for papers for people to tell their personal stories. So I saw it. I didn't really pay attention to the details, but I decided, okay, I'm going to just write. And so I just wrote. And it came out to be 7 pages for the first pass. And I shared it with some of my friends. At the same time, I contacted AFSP and asked them, what do you need for submitting stories and stuff? And it turns out that they limit any stories that they take in to 2 pages, and mine was 7. So there's that on one hand, and then there's a friend of mine that's telling me on the other hand that I have good material for writing a book. So I had to decide, am I going to expand and go towards the book, or am I going to condense and write my story for AFSP? And lo and behold, the book won out, at least until today. So I just started the book, and I really believe that a lot of my energy was freed up from past things. My 2 sons had gone off to college. I had been settled in with my Catholicism. My medication for my own depression was pretty much resolved, and I knew what I was doing. That was a big, lots of experiments and trying different things. So those things had settled down, and I think that just left an opening for the Holy Spirit to come in and to inspire me to write the book, and to take my friend's advice of do the book. So that's pretty much how it went. The other thing specific to my father's suicide, as far as writing the book, it's a very public thing, obviously, and so is talking in front of people about it. And I always thought that my experiences and even telling people about it would be kept pretty private, because it's a very shameful, difficult thing to talk about with people. But I've done so much work in regaining my life that it's easier to talk about, and it's also more critical for me to talk about. Okay. So to let you know, from the time I decided to write the book and the time that I actually got it published, it was 3.5 years. And that included interviewing a lot of my relatives, having my brothers and sisters read it. I have 5 brothers and sisters, and they all read the manuscript. Just, I wanted to make sure that they were comfortable with it, or that I didn't have anything inaccurate. And then there was also included in that was self-publishing. I decided to self-publish the book. I just knew that was the right thing for me for this book, and that's what I did. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I didn't know how I was going to write a book, but I just knew I was going to do it, and I was committed to doing it. So I just moved ahead with it. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about suicide. This is my own labeling. I like to think of it as being looked at in 2 different directions. One is from the outside in, and that is the science, the observing, the studies, statistics, etc. And then I have it from the inside out, and that's where my book comes in and my story comes in. And the inside out is basically personal stories, memoirs. It's also suicide notes that people left behind. So one's more quantitative and one's more qualitative, and they both are important in trying to get a picture and get a handle on what is really happening so that we can improve it. So let me just give you, I'm going to get into the book, but I wanted to just give you a few statistics because I think it's important to hear them, and I think, as I said, it's important to have both ends of the spectrum. Okay, so to begin with, almost 43,000 people die by suicide every year. That's 117 people a day. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. Ahead of that is heart disease, cancer, diabetes, things like that. Suicide is the 10th. But if you take a snapshot of a population within that whole thing, and you look at ages 15 to 24, which is the younger set, for them, the suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death. So it goes up significantly, which is sad. Men die by suicide 3.5 times more. I guess more often than women. So men die 3.5 times more often than women by suicide, I mean. And females actually attempt suicide 3 times as often as men. Firearms account for almost half of all suicides. And it's estimated, there's one estimate, I've seen a few, but that it's costing us $44 billion a year to deal with the problem of suicide. And most of that cost comes from medical expenses and also from lost work time. That's how they evaluated it. The last one I want to touch upon is what's called suicide rate. It's kind of like a per capita statistics. What it is it's the number of suicides per 100,000 people in a given area. So across the United States, it's around, 12.9, I think. Yeah, 12.9 if you average all the states together. 12.9 per 100,000. Then they break it out to every single state. And there are some states that are lower and some states that are higher. And I just want to mention the ones that are lower. Massachusetts, New Jersey, and New York are all in the lower. They are around 8. Then on the other end, around 20, 19, 17, that kind of end, there's Colorado, Utah, New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont are on the top end. So now I'll go to suicide from the inside out. That's my personal experience, and my book falls into this category. So the title of my book is Unraveling My Father's Suicide, because that was the focus of how I started looking at things. But as I looked further, did more research, I found out that there were other cousins in the family that had taken their lives by suicide. And also there's my own attempt. I don't think I said that yet, but I at one point was really depressed and down and out, and I attempted to take my own life. So I included all of those in here. You might be wondering why there's so many suicides in my family. There's a thing called family clustering. It's commonly known in the suicide field, if there is a field, I guess. And it's basically pretty well known that if there's a suicide within a family, the likelihood of the children of that person taking their lives by suicide is a lot greater. So when I was in therapy, that was one of the things that my therapist had told me about. He was really concerned because I was depressed and I was suicidal for a long time, and he told me that my father's suicide makes it more challenging for me because if not intellectually, on the body level, it's a matter of experiencing it as an option for dealing with life. because that's what my father did. So, okay, so I will read from my book, and I just realized, I don't know where it is. Yes. I'm actually going to read multiple readings, and for the sake of time, I sort of excerpted different paragraphs, but I might read it as if it flows all together. So I just want to let you know. So this one is from chapter 1, Into the Abyss, and it is about me finding out about my father's suicide. I woke up in a haze one morning in the middle of my junior year at college. It was January 25th, 1983, the day after my 21st birthday. I could barely make out the silhouettes of the two people standing in front of my bed. They were saying something, but their words were unclear. Not because they were mumbling, but because my hearing hadn't caught up with my seeing yet. When I realized these two people were my sisters, Diane and Patty, I groggily asked, "What are you doing? It's so early." I couldn't make sense of what was happening. So I forgot to tell you, I was up at the University of New Hampshire going to college, and my sisters came to my apartment. Once my hearing kicked in, though, I clearly heard Diane and Patty tell me my father committed suicide yesterday. They said he did it in his apartment back in Manchester, the city where he grew up. "What do you mean Dad committed suicide? That was my birthday," I muttered. Jump ahead. "We're here to give you a ride home," my sisters continued. A ride home? The meaning of those words didn't register. Why would I go home? I wondered. What would I do there? A day or so later, an emotional upheaval finally registered. I had decided to stay at school and not go back home with my two sisters. So I broke down in tears between classes and realized I had to go home. I couldn't be alone to face the reality of my father re-entering my life. Never mind that he did so by hanging himself with a belt. Having made my decision, I went to my professor's office to tell him I would be missing class. I was taken aback when he asked me how my father did it. Tears welled in my eyes. It was my first realization that many people do not know how insular and private suicide usually is. They have never learned about the particular shame and grief those left behind after a suicide have to face. So the next readings are going to be from chapter 6, called my Unrelenting Ideation. This is about my own struggles with being suicidal. During my darkest days with depression, my face was long and drab, expressionless. My voice was flat and my body had little animation. I often felt like my whole existence was in a deep freeze, cold and black. The only direction my mind could go was downward in a spiral. I persuaded myself that no one would be fazed by my committing suicide. I had little contact with my family and was convinced they all thought it was just a matter of time before I killed myself. I really believed no one cared. I gritted my teeth while trying to persuade myself that what I knew through faith and reason was right, and what I knew through suicide and injury was wrong. The two categories of thought would battle against each other in a duel-like fashion. I watched and listened in trepidation, and I was never certain of the outcome. Holding my breath, I asked myself, is this the time I'm gonna do it? I was completely conscious of my mental state, yet too weak to loosen its hold. It was as if it was suspended right in front of me, but just out of reach. I often had an illusory sense of power during those times. It was the power of free will, and it was palpable. Though I couldn't touch it in one instance, in another, I knew I could grab it by the throat and choose to end my life. All I had to do was go along with my suicidal thoughts and say the F-bomb to everyone. I would be done with it and no one would have a say in the matter. When I was in that state, and I think even just being depressed, there's a lot of anger that was mixed in with the lethargy and the dark views of life. So you'll see that, like, within this book anyways, that there's an angry edge to some of what's going on with my struggles. This mental torment went on intermittently for many years. Early on, the darkness of suicide enveloped me such that I just wanted to stop the unending pain. I didn't care about the people I would leave behind, because if I cared about them, that might puncture the Berlin Wall inside me and open the floodgate to unending pain and grief. Taking my own life felt like it would provide more relief than facing my feelings ever could. Long before I read about the legacy effects of suicide, my therapist told me that children of a parent who committed suicide are at higher risk of committing suicide themselves compared to children who are never exposed to such a trauma. So this is the family clustering idea. I looked at him thinking he was an idiot for telling me this. That's supposed to make me feel better, I groaned. He told me he was concerned for my safety and was trying to get me to take my situation seriously. I told him that information made me feel like I was fighting a losing battle. I continued, "Good, then it's just a matter of time and I'll be gone. No more pain, no more therapy, no more crazy life. I can't wait, just take me, the sooner the better." I felt a strange sense of relief knowing it was just a matter of time before my life was ended. I would no longer have to make sense of the conflicting thoughts clashing around in my head. The idea of being free of the torment was appealing. My therapist's information backfired, at least temporarily. So then in chapter 13, it's silver linings, which is basically getting to the other side of the illness and the darkness. Depression made me think things could never get better. When it became severe enough, it was oppressive and debilitating. I remember waiting to put my boys down to sleep for the night so I could go to my bedroom. I could go there and fall on my bed and lay in the dark with my arm over my eyes, frozen in time. It was the only part of the day when I completely gave in to depression. My mind would either go blank or step into the black hole of desperation and not come out for what seemed like eons. I literally could not move. My body felt like it weighed 3 times my actual weight, but when my husband walked in, I managed to lift it and go to my closet to pick out clothes for the next day. I didn't want him to know how bad it was. I would often stand in front of the closet, not knowing how much time had passed. My husband would eventually come over and I would snap out of my stupor. I wasn't going to let depression run my life. This is later on in the same chapter. I have been fortunate to grow in my understanding and practice of prayer, which is a lifeline to God. Whether it's a Hail Mary, a thank you to God, a self-righteous complaint to Jesus, a call to the Holy Spirit for the right words in a conversation, or a plea for the salvation of my parents' souls, I know He is pleased to hear from me. Of course, He's probably not thrilled when I complain self-righteously, but I know He prefers that to my silence, so I do my best to stay connected. I even stay connected in my most confusing and painful times. I tell Him everything. Why are you keeping me alive? I never would have guessed that hell exists on earth. This has to be it because I can't imagine anything worse. Please, please don't let me wake up tomorrow. It's pure agony, and I don't want the ceaseless screaming streaming through my body anymore. Just take me. I have ranted and pleaded with God in this way during many of my darkest hours. I believe he was listening to all of it and providing me comfort and help in ways I may not have even known. In addition to my personal prayer, I have been blessed to have been taught the rosary, which I pray every day. I hold the prayer beads to track where I am in the lengthy series of Hail Marys, Our Fathers, and Glory Bees. And I connect with the Holy Family, the Holy Trinity, and all the saints. In that way, my spiritual network and safety net is broadened. The practice is meditative and brings me solace and reprieve from the material world. That isn't to say I never become depressed or that I find a quick way out through prayer. No, our minds and bodies are imperfect, so prayer is not an end-all. It is, however, another powerful tool for staying alive and living in joy. Then the last passage is about me and my brothers and sisters. When my brothers and sisters and I had children, we finally found the voice that was long absent throughout the generations of our family. I can't recall ever hearing my parents say, "I love you," to us, or to each other. I can't recall ever hearing my grandparents say it to my mother or father either. As a result, we never said it to them or to each other. When we had our own children, though, we broke that cycle. We began telling our children, "I love you," even before they could understand it. We have established fulfilling lives for our children and ourselves, and in doing so, we have ingrained in our families and future generations what is probably the most powerful deterrent to suicide, that is, love. So I want to mention one thing in particular that has happened since the book's been published. In the book, I talk about one of my cousins, and his name is Ethan. And he, along with me, my sister, another cousin, have all struggled with suicidal ideation. And I saw him at a family gathering, and he came up to me, told me that he knew I was writing a book. And I had no idea that this set of relatives knew, you know. So I said, "Oh," I said, "Really?" I said, "Do you know what it's about?" Because I didn't want to, you know, sort of preclude him. So he said, "Oh yeah," you know. So he basically told me, and he knew what it was about. And what he said to me was that it was really important for me to write my book because people need to know that this happens. Unfortunately, Ethan took his own life on Christmas Eve this last year. It's really sad for a lot of our family members. A lot of my cousins had read the book, and so we're just kind of in being stunned. I mean, me personally, I guess I didn't realize this, but I thought I wrote the book, the story's ended, okay, no more suicide, that's it, you know? And no, that's not the case. So that's it. We'll do a question and answer if you would like to.
That was wonderful. I read your book and loved your book, and
Thanks.
you're going to help a lot of people.
Sorry, I'm having
You're going to help, obviously, a lot of people through
Oh.
your pain and your family's pain. And I want to ask if you believe that people are in so much pain themselves. Do you believe that they're in so much pain that they take their own lives?
Well, when I attempted it, that's where I was. Based on the circumstances I know about the suicides in my lineage, it's usually from a painful place and probably a hopeless place.
And do you think there's enough marketing, you know, through public health agencies, advertisements out there to people to make it okay, you know, that people have these dark places in their mental health, that there should be some public health campaign to ask people to
Katie
Reach out.
works in public health. No,
Reach out.
I think people are trying to do that. I think people are trying to be able to talk about it and not keep it in the closet. Not only just the topic, but the ideas, the thoughts that go on in the head around it. To be able to find, here's the other thing. There's a suicide lifeline. And there's actually a couple different ones. There's Samaritans here in Massachusetts, and then there's a national one. What I've learned is that that's not only for people who are thinking that they're going to take their lives and don't want to. It's also for people who are left behind after a suicide and don't know how to cope. And it's for people who have attempted suicide but are still living and need support. So they're trying to get the word out. The other thing is there are local things in Worcester. I know you're from the Boston end of things, so I know there are things there too, but in Worcester there's a Central Mass walk for suicide every year, and it's not just the walk. I mean, that's to raise money for them to do the real work, which is, studying suicide, getting people help, that kind of thing. In Littleton, there is an organization, See a New Sun Foundation. I walk their walk. They have a walk every year in September. I've done it for 3 years now, and it was started by, I think it was a mother whose child in the school system actually took their lives by suicide. And so this group is wonderful. They are really focused on high school and middle school and going in and educating the teachers and educating the students and offering help and that kind of thing. The other big thing that's going on is American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is really pushing that we all can help. If we can learn some of the signs of when a person is suicidal, if we can be brave enough to say, are you thinking about taking your own life? I have a friend that actually did that. She had a guy fixing the walls in her house, and she just thought that, it wasn't just this one time, he had been coming over, and she thought something was a little off, and so she just asked him, are you thinking of doing that? And he was. So, that's the other thing. That's the big push, is that we on the lower level, it's kind of like the lay people, us, can help out.
I don't want to take up all the questions, but one more. Do you think that nationally in this country we have a champion that has spoke out, even from Washington, that's the head of public health, about this very serious? Who is it? The person who's a champion that's a government official that...
That's funny, because I've been thinking about that as well, like that is needed. And I don't know of anybody that does that.
Neither, that's why I was just asking.
Yeah, I do know that American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and then there's the American Foundation of Suicidology. They have gone down to DC to help get some laws in place to help the process. So, but it's, that's still not, it's really got to be wider spread.
Thank you.
Can you speak a little more to the shame? You brought that up several times, that survivors feel.
Sure.
Not survivors of family members who have committed suicide.
So I don't know if everyone heard. She asked if I could speak to the shame that people who are left behind experience, right? Yeah. Yes. For me, shame, because I also have shame dealing with my growing up in my family household. So I've kind of looked at shame, and to me, it's feeling bad about who I am. Whereas guilt is about feeling bad about what I did. So there's the two difference. And so when someone commits suicide, there is that shame, that feeling bad about who I am, because here's my parent, or who's my brother, whatever it is. You know, we had high respect for them. We thought things were going to go okay. We never thought they'd like stoop to taking their lives. So that's what I would say. Excuse me. The other thing that I would say is that it makes it really difficult to talk with other people about it, because it's so inside, and it's just like there's a wall there that it makes, which is why the hotline is important, because if more and more people know about that, then the people left behind can also access it too, if they need, if they need to or want to.
I just thought it would be helpful for you to share some of those potential warning signs, or that you were mentioning, in terms of people who might be having these thoughts, these suicidal thoughts.
I don't know that I know them offhand. I do know some things. This is about what are some of the thoughts that or signs that people are suicidal, and how can you pick up on it? So I have seen that drastic changes in behavior. Maybe someone becomes more secluded, or maybe someone becomes more out there. And then, I don't know, do you know, Tom? Maybe you know.
Well, I think definitely paying attention to any changes of a behavior is key, and it's starting to give away things, starting to isolate. If their whole frame of reference becomes more negative, you emphasize those competing thoughts that you're fighting inside your head.
Right.
I think that's all some of them, but I think the central one is the change of behavior, the isolating.
The negative,
negative
outlook
thinking.
is another big one. Yeah.
Yes.
So.
Just in that regard, so sometimes it's very subtle. I had a person, she was a student of mine, one of my colleagues' cousin. She was Jewish and converted, but she lived in New York, and I did so, and eventually baptized her. And, she had made a few attempts, but it was interesting after the final time when she succeeded. And over the course of time, she'd spoken about this friend or that other friend and whatever. But somehow or another, none of us knew each other. We knew each other because of her conversation, but we didn't know each other. And as we were talking at the funeral service, gee, I heard from her a few days before. Oh, gee, so did I. Oh, gee, so did I.
Yes.
And, we all sort of realized, well, those were the goodbye calls.
Right.
Now, had we all known each other,
Right.
we might have put two and two together and said, oh, she's calling a lot more than she used to. Oh, gee whiz, but
I think that's really important. It ties into the
sometimes
shame
it's
too.
just very, very
We
subtle.
don't know, and we can't take responsibility for it.
Oh, yeah.
But we can also love and try and stay connected as much as possible. So you were doing that to the best of your ability.
Yeah.
But we still reach out. That's a very good point. We don't always know, because it is so internal.
So I have, there was a group of 9 of us that hung out together in high school, and 3 of us have had suicides in our families, and one was really recent. It was a couple years ago. Her son jumped off the George Washington Bridge. There was a lot going on in his life, and I don't know all the details, but what he did before he jumped, he called his brother, he called his mother, and he called his father, and talked to each of them, but none of them knew that he did to each other. Yeah. So it's this weird state. I mean, you're like conscious of just wanting out because it's so painful, and also knowing that well, maybe you shouldn't do this. I don't know. And and yet it doesn't feel like there's any other way to handle the situation. It's very, very, very intense. Oh, wait, Eileen was,
Well, my question is similar, like the people that I know of who have committed suicide, it's even their closest relatives had no clue. So it's very difficult to know whether, even when you're living with somebody. And in your case, did your husband pick up on anything?
you know, he knew I was depressed, but
But I think a lot of people, they hold it inside
yeah.
and they don't want people to know. But so the anger just builds inside.
The other thing with my husband is he didn't know. Like even
And you
if,
didn't want him to know?
I mean, no, what I'm saying is that he didn't know the signs. He didn't,
Okay.
he wasn't looking for it. He didn't think that that would ever happen to me, you know. So that can happen as well, yeah. Well,
Kathleen, do we know, are more suicides associated with folks who have been in a long-term depression, or is it more like short-term traumatic type things that drive people to suicide? Like a soldier coming back who's just gone through a traumatic event versus someone who's been in a long-term depression for 5 or 10 years.
right. So the question is, do we know if most suicides are because people have been, or not because, but are coming from the fact that they've been in a long-term depression, or is it something, you know, really horrible has happened and they can't deal with it, kind of thing? I don't know the answer to that. You know, I think that's a really good question. My guess is that both occur, but I don't know to what extent.
I wanted to ask you about what it took to write the book, because I'm amazed at how courageous you are, and strong to talk about the most intimate details of your life and what you were thinking at your depths, and also, you know, to kind of tear the scab off about, very difficult subject, family member, your father, in your life. And where did you find the courage to do that?
God, I guess. I just let somebody know, a friend of mine from the past, I let him know that I had written this book. And I said, it's kind of on the edge, and then said, but I guess I'm always on the edge. Because, I tend to be out there, looking at things hard.
That's really something, because I think a lot of people want to write a book, but not many people actually do. So I give you a lot of credit for doing it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Can I ask again? Kathleen, you lived in both Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Any ideas on why the disparity? You mentioned that New Hampshire is a much higher rate than Massachusetts.
I don't know. The
neighbors.
only thing that I've heard on a broad stroke kind of thing is that in the more populated areas, there's actually less suicide per 100,000 than in the more rural and so like the states, like Nebraska or Utah, they tend to be a little bit more countryish or whatever. But
Well, that seclusion from other folks. Or
so you know what you can do? If you want to send me an email and ask me the question, I can find out, because I'd be interested in it too.
I have 2 questions. One is a language question, and I've noticed that you use the term die by suicide when talking about it. Just wondering if that's a conscious rather than commit suicide, or so something about that. You can start with that.
Sure, then we'll come back to your other
Yes.
question. So the question is that she's noticed in my vocabulary in describing how people take their lives with suicide and versus like committed suicide, that kind of thing. There is a big push for people who have struggled with suicide, who have, attempted, who are struggling with the aftermath of somebody else's suicide, all of that. Vocabulary is so important because it implies and has a deep meaning. And committed suicide has been something that has not been liked for a long time. It comes off as if the person, I want to say, committed a crime, which in some sense they did, right? But it doesn't really capture the essence of what the person has gone through, or at least what we think most of the people have gone through, which is, all the pain and the struggle and the whatever. So I did notice on the police report for my father's suicide, it has weapon and it has belt. It has victim, my father. Criminal, my father. So they have a really hard time, like in police language, to capture it, so that the psychological and emotional parts don't get left out. So I've used committed suicide in my book sporadically, but I really try not to use that language. Especially it's American AFSP. They really are really focusing on vocabulary, not just on that, but vocabulary to help the situation.
That definitely resonates. So my second question was, you talked about how you kind of thought that once the book would be done, or once you finished the book, kind of done, but then your cousin just recently suicide.
Yeah.
It's not quite done. So just thinking kind of, what are you thinking for next, and if there are groups you're planning to go to, or how to have these kind of talks, and or kind of what you're thinking ahead. What are your next steps?
What is my next step? I have sort of thought ahead, but I really am taking it a step at a time. It's sort of like when the book was done, it's like, oh, okay, so now I have to sell it. What am I going to do? And how do I do that? So I had to learn about marketing and learn about getting in touch with this and that. A lot of stuff like that. I don't really know, but thank you for asking and making me think about it some more.
Well, I think, particularly in these kind of venues, I think people made a good point that the getting the stories out is the important part, right? So they're great.
Did you have another question?
Those are my two questions. I'll think of them.
I had a follow-up to the first question there, which is about committing a crime. When I think of the word commit, I usually either think of crimes or sin. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, you mentioned that categorizing this as a crime doesn't quite capture it. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about categorizing suicide as a sin, and if there's gray area there as well.
Okay, so the question is has there been some, well, if I could talk about suicide as it relates to sin, because we have a sense of the word commit. It's usually a crime, commit a crime, or commit a sin. And so the crime part we talked about with the police report and how it doesn't seem to fit. With the sin part, what I would say is, this is speaking from my experience. I'm not a professional on this. And it's also speaking from my experience with the Catholic Church, because that is my background. Basically, when you commit a sin, there's the sin itself, or the behavior that is a sin. Let me see if I can get this right. So there's a behavior that is a sin, but then also there is the person's culpability for that sin. In other words, how culpable was I for spitting water in your face, that kind of thing, or how culpable was my father for taking his own life? On some level, everybody's culpable, but there are mitigating circumstances that sort of lessen what you might be punished for, or the backlash that you would get for it. Oops. I don't know if...
I guess that would sort of make me think that we should almost never categorize suicide as a sin, because there's almost always a depression or a lack of faith or something like that. Are there situations where you think it actually would or should be categorized as immoral or sinful?
Right. There are two things that
and I guess I'm mostly asking because the standard teaching is that it is a sin, right?
Right. And it is. It's like the raw truth is that it is a sin. How responsible you are for that sin is the culpability angle that I was talking about. So, do not kill your mother or father. If you kill your father, that's a sin, but what your repercussion is going to be will vary according to how you did it.
Can I add to that and ask a question with it?
Yeah, please add to that.
I think what you're saying is that suicide, like other objective evils, it's the matter of sin. So it's the objective act itself is grave evil, and if somebody, and then there's the two internal things you're talking about, somebody would have to have sufficient knowledge that it's wrong and full consent of the will in doing it. And I think, Kathleen, what you might be saying is that some suicide victims might not either be in their right mind, i.e. have the proper knowledge at the time, or even perhaps more common, not fully consent. Maybe they don't have the power of their free will at that time in their lives.
Because they're ill, or
Because of their illness, yeah. I mean, intellect and will, they go together. If you're not in your right mind through no fault of your own, then perhaps you don't have the power to consent, or you the free will at that moment. So let me ask you that then. When you were down as far as you went, did you feel like you had any freedom to choose or not to choose this?
I think at times, and at other times I felt like there was. It's kind of tricky, because if I say at other times it felt like I had no other choice, then why am I still here? If that was the case,
And how would you answer that? If you did feel like you had no other choice, what was it within you that didn't choose the negative?
I would think it's God protecting me in some way, Like, even if I can't say it, but in my heart, that will to live was still there, even though I was angry and I was, wanting to just do me in and all that kind of stuff. I wouldn't even, it's kind of, because it's sort of an unconscious thing. Because I wouldn't even say it was a conscious thing, that I was, thinking about suicide, and yet at the same time I thought, oh, well, maybe I should just stay alive, or maybe whatever. That wasn't necessarily happening. And when it was really bad and I was thinking that it was suicidal and that's the only thing I can do, what am I, this is crazy, what am I going to do? Sort of like bouncing off like bumper cars or something, because I didn't know what to do. Here's the other thing. One of the reasons I didn't know what to do was because I had to pick a way to take my life. And one of the things that I struggled with, this is like quite intellectual, sort of, but I had to figure out a way to take my life. And every single way that I came up with, I could end up still alive and more injured than I was before. So that was another deterrent for me. But I think in general, I think there was just that in my being, you know, about staying alive. I don't know, did that answer your question? She doesn't look like it.
You still had some will to live, is what you're saying.
Yes,
Is that somewhere in the-
even if it wasn't a conscious
Yeah.
thing, it was there, it was existent, yeah. Which is why, you know, even if I thought suicide's the only way out, I gotta get out of here, and I'm still alive, my will has kicked in to stay alive.
Was there any sense of obligation? In other words, I have no right to do that.
Later on in the span of time that I struggled with this ideation, I had converted back to Catholicism, and there was one time where it didn't matter, like it didn't even matter that God was in my life. It did, you know, I was just, it didn't matter. And then other times it was, I could never do this to God. How could I do this? I could never do this to my kids. How can I do this to my kids? That kind of thing. But I have to say, it's pretty scary and it's sad when I think that I should take my life and not worry about my kids because, you know, their dad's there and they're going to grow up anyways, and, you know, all this justification around it. It gets to be scary.
I have two observations. One is about the question of an example of suicide that would likely be fully culpable. I would point out, like, volunteering for a kamikaze run. You're deliberately taking your life and you're choosing to do it, and you're not under no compulsion or external or internal obligation to do it. And the second observation, one of the most powerful insights I found in your book was the observation that, my mind is blanking right now, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem.
Yes. Did you want me to talk to that?
I'm not gonna stop you.
So he was talking about the adage, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem, and how that has helped me at times to realize that, you know, things can get better, that kind of thing. And also to realize, like, when it's done, it's done. And so it's challenging, though, when I was depressed and suicidal, I could challenge that adage. You know, there was like so much anger that I would just challenge that adage too, and tell people, oh, don't tell me that, or whatever, you know, just, it gets to be the detaching from people and pushing them away can happen pretty severely. But it is a great adage. It's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. There's no coming back.
Just listening to your talk, it sounded to me that suicide was a choice, or maybe not a choice, but it was something that was where you're despairing. And I'm wondering if you could maybe just talk about how hope entered into your life, or whether, as a person thinking about suicide, whether you would reach out with some sort of hope somewhere, somehow, to help you pull out of wherever you're at.
For me, the hope came from my faith. It wasn't until I had that in place, and I had it consistent, and I knew I was Catholic, that I was able to feel like I knew who I was. And also to obtain hope for future situations. You know, before everything was black, I was never going to get out of this depression. But, uniting your suffering to Christ, it can help. It helps me move through some things.
I obviously haven't read the book. I probably wouldn't ask this question, but notwithstanding your obvious deep fighting faith, I'm wondering if the process of writing the book and publishing it, if it was a cathartic moment, somewhat of a catharsis for you, or at least help to heal, the wounds of some obviously very painful memories. What did that do for you, this process that you went through?
So he is asking about a catharsis and what did it do for my healing in writing the book and stuff. The reason I was smiling is because one of the first times I talked to one of my sisters about my book, we're driving and she's looking at me and she says, "So, are you doing that for catharsis?" And I just turned to her and I said, "No, I'm not doing it for catharsis," because it just seemed like such a pat response, And then later on, I get onto a radio show, and someone asked me, what happened when you did it? And I said, "Oh, well, there was a catharsis." And my sister says, "What? I thought you said." So there definitely was. I feel like I thought I was feeling pretty good before I wrote the book, and after I wrote the book and reconnected with a lot of my relatives, and reaffirmed my faith, I just felt more solid in who I am. And so my birthday, for instance, for many, many years, it was just one day of upset, because that's the day my father took his life, and I just couldn't get over the confusion. I didn't know how to deal with it. Why did he do it? Why did he do it on that day? Just all of that was there. And so the celebration of my own birthday kind of got pushed aside. And now, even more with the book, now my birthday, it really is about me. And it's about my friends and my family members and stuff. And so it feels like there's been a deepening of my healing. Thanks. Okay, so we'll take this as the last question.
Has the book helped your sister? You said one of your sisters is suicidal. Has this process helped your sister?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Has the process helped your sister? You said it's also suicidal.
The process of writing the book.
I mean, she's read it.
I haven't asked explicitly any of my 5 brothers and sisters if it helps them. I do know one sister in particular did not really want to be involved at the beginning. For whatever, she just didn't want to go back, didn't want to step back. And yesterday she sent me email saying that she wished she could make it to the book talk. So it's definitely affected people. And not just my immediate family, but cousins too. Because with Facebook, we're all connected, so. Was it? Okay. Thank you very much.